film speaks for itself. Great. All of you describe your organizations and exciting movements that you've been a part of. But for all of you, besides being millennials, the other thing that you have in common is your organizations or movements in some way or another are not traditional. So they're not quite nonprofits, they're not quite businesses, they're not quite art organizations. There's something different. I know, Shane, in some of the stuff that I read from you, you talked about almost being happy to escape the traditional confines of architecture and sitting behind a desk for hours and hours and hours on end, and able to escape that and be able to break out into the world and do something different. Can you talk some more about that?
Absolutely. I was kind of bashing on the recession earlier and putting me in this tough spot, but it was actually a gift, giving me this opportunity to really explore and evaluate what was important to me. If I had followed the track that I expected and that my parents expected, I wouldn't be here today. I'd probably be behind a desk, slinging code on a computer to make a building look pretty. And yet here I am now, really had a chance to crystallize and get to the root of what was most critical and important to me. And so I feel very blessed and fortunate to have had the opportunity.
Okay. Jen, there are a lot of interesting aspects to your organization. It's a part business, it's a part food systems, it's part education, and it even seems like it's part transportation. Could you talk some about systems generally and which ones you think are important to impact with your work?
Yeah, so that's a great question. What I love about our program, what I love about the work that we get to do with young people is that food touches everything, and food business not only touches everything, but gives you a really, really effective medium to make change in a whole bunch of different areas. So we have found that, in planning any program, we're not just addressing one thing, we're addressing 50. That has made it especially important for us to really bend our work to the folks who are doing everything on the front line. So that's myself and my co-director, but also our educators and our students, and listening to what they are seeing as the most important or challenging issues. We had a conversation a few days ago, and this is just like a very small example, in a class about if we should be doing the majority of our cooking aspect of the program during the winter or during the summer. And some of our teachers were saying, gosh, I just love the summer in Detroit. It's the most beautiful time of year. It's so green. It's so amazing. Why wouldn't we want to be getting all together in the summer? And our students said, gosh, the summer in the city is the scariest time of year because that's when everyone gets heated and things start happening. And I don't want to be outside walking around and during that season. And we kind of realized, okay, so this is, not only is it in the wintertime, it gets dark early, we have to talk about transportation and safety then, but especially in the summer, because this is something that isn't on the minds of a lot of people who have private vehicular transport, maybe have an independent income and kind of get to dictate their own schedules. They don't have to be thinking about their pathway home or what's going to be happening given the change of seasons. So all that to kind of point to this idea that we're constantly looking to what is coming up in our classes, what our students are paying attention to, what our teachers care about, to see what systems we need to be addressing. But definitely at our core, and it says it right in our name, the Detroit Food Academy, we focus on redefining the food system in the city of Detroit. And we think that by localizing it, we can not only have a greater sense of sovereignty, which is something that our city both strives for and vitally needs, because there are a lot of unmet needs in our city, and we need to provide for ourselves, we know that. But also it allows for the opportunity for young people especially to create their own path and to stay in our city and to want to continue to contribute and address the challenges as they grow. So it's not only for ownership now, but it's for the ability to dictate the terms of your own life in the future. Which is, I think, something really interesting. And when I first read the title of this panel about millennials, my first reaction to that term is often a negative one. And I hear it portrayed that way a lot in literature. Millennials have a sense of entitlement and they want everything, they don't want to work for it, which I don't think is true necessarily, but I think it can be a categorization a negative categorization of this really positive idea that like, yeah, we want it all, and that means we want good jobs that pay. We want to live in safe neighborhoods. We want to eat healthy food. And we want to be able to have all of it without having to say, no, you don't get that until you're at a certain pay grade. And I think that kind of idealistic perspective is what I hear echoed from my students. And I think that that's kind of the positive spin in what's driving a lot of the work that we do and that I think many of the people here and in this room do. It's
interesting, millennials actually want what baby boomers grew up with and didn't have to ask for. That's true. And that, largely baby boomers sometimes stand in the way of. Jessica, we talked earlier about just the blurred lines between profit, nonprofit, art, service, advocacy, so on and so forth. When you went overseas and you saw the situation with trafficking and it hit you in the gut, I think all of us have that moment at one time or another. Why not just go and join a traditional nonprofit organization that worked on trafficking?
Yeah, and there's some wonderful nonprofits that are fighting trafficking, and we work to support them. We donate 10% of our profits to them. We work closely with them. We do everything we can to drive our audience to them. But I think what I felt was I didn't know about any of those groups, and a lot of those groups are dealing with some really, really intense issues. And there's a certain population of wonderful people who are ready for those conversations, and there's a certain population of wonderful people who aren't quite ready for those conversations or haven't been faced with them yet. And so the idea came to create a product that could be placed where people wouldn't expect to be faced with these conversations, in a magazine, in a fashion blog, in a boutique, where for $38 you can take a stance, you can become part of this conversation in a very small way, and you can get a little reminder on your wrist of a global issue. And the idea was to create a product to plant a seed, to encourage the beginning of what could tomorrow be an incredible activist who can then work with some of those amazing nonprofits. And I think also the population of artisans that we work with in Cambodia aren't necessarily in need of the help of a nonprofit. They're in need of customers. And so for us, a lot of the work that we do is really about giving these artists that we believe in access to the global market and collaborating on jewelry that's compelling and accessible to a Western millennial, potentially consumer. And so, I think that sort of nurturing leaders in the Cambodian art world and supporting fully capable, wonderful, new leaders in that space is something really exciting, and that's sort of the work of business and not necessarily the work of nonprofits. And I think another conversation that we sort of want to be having is that if we can be creating cool, compelling, fashionable, high-quality products in a fair trade environment in Cambodia and selling them in top boutiques in Manhattan, why can't the other designers who are being showcased in that boutique do the same? So I think that's, again, sort of a matter of business, and that's a conversation for the fashion space. And I think the fashion space is sort of an important player in this conversation because there's such huge issues with this sort of sweatshop labor. And so I think for us, proving that we can make beautiful products fairly is something that the nonprofit groups that we work with aren't necessarily dealing in that space.